Yeah, I mean, I still don't fully think that you can scientifically test something supernatural, especially when it comes to something like um, a deity, like one of the omni gods. I mean, you can find logical inconsistencies with it, so you can sort of give arguments to why it doesn't work. Hi, Kevin. By the way, nice to have you back. Um, but unless we're talking about actually the supernatural having a physical presence, I don't know how we can really test for those. So what would you say to that? Do you think there's any way we can test for them?
Oh, and it's similar to like you can't yeah, it's like you can make a test for testing prayer or for to that god. But like there's so much underdetermination on the other side, on that supernatural side. You don't know if it's that god that failed to give you this prayer. You don't know if it's another god that failed to give you this prayer. So to say that the Christian God wasn't there to give you the prayer, it's kind of difficult in that regard. I find it you can't if you searched the whole universe and did not find it, like you still wouldn't be able to answer this question because of what's outside the universe.
Mm.
Something.
And they have actually done studies on the effectiveness of prayer, and with people in hospital, and people who either there were three groups. I got three wrong on my hand. There were three groups. There was the first group who knew they were being prayed for, the second group who didn't know they were being prayed for, and the third group who were not being prayed for. And the people who were aware that they were being prayed for actually had a slower recovery than the others. And they thought that what actually happened was because they believed themselves that God was going to heal them, they stopped almost fighting themselves and trying to will themselves better. They had put it in someone else's hands. Um, but yeah, I mean, people still will go back and forth and talk about miracle healings and all of that sort of stuff. Um, so we got a couple of comments. Cafe says, if you're defining the supernatural as that which is not natural or that which defies the laws of physics, then you're essentially defining the supernatural out of existence. Um,
Take like a physics approach, yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say, if if you do take that sort of physicalist approach, then yes, you're right. But if you understand a difference between metaphysical and things that are wholly physical, then are you really defining it out of existence? Another way to think of defining it is something that is above the natural world. Um, so again, I don't think you're necessarily um, defining it out of existence, but it's a fair enough point.
Even if they if supernatural things do exist, it's also the belief that like these things don't have any direct effect on at least the physical world or the natural world.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about a more deistic style god, where before there was anything, there was this deistic style god, and it kickstarted everything, and then basically fucked off. That doesn't necessarily define it out of existence. It's basically going before there was physics, there was this thing that started everything.
The issue with that, I would love to hear what Lord Brian has to say with this because I don't know his form of deism, but what I think of deism, like there should be a naturalistic explanation for everything, then, including this beginning of the universe. So then, to say that a god started it, that should also have a naturalistic explanation.
Well, I'd agree with you, obviously, but then I don't believe gods exist, so of course I'd agree with you. And I also think it's a more simplistic, if we're going to apply the razor, it's a more simplistic explanation that things occurred naturally over time than there was some, non-physical being that created all the physical. Um, yeah, to me, I find it a harder pill to swallow, but I understand that others don't.
not necessarily has to be simple in its explanation. It just has to be it has just a string, a complete string with no gaps in it of justified um, inferences from one from the other. You can start from physics to get to chemistry, to get to biology, to get to sociology. Whereas if there's some break where some deity did it, then there's no way to justify how that happened.
We've got a couple more comments. Leon says, I don't think it rules out the existence unless you define existence as that which is strictly in accordance with the uniform laws of nature. So that's basically what we're saying. Unless you
Yeah,
take a physicalist approach, you're right there. Kevin says, isn't it a bit weird to study prayer effectiveness? I remember reading any religious philosophers arguing that anyone thinking God answers prayers, like if you were his customer buying his favors through prayer, is either arrogant and that's not a good believer, or deluded because God doesn't work that way, or at least they say. And I'd have to agree with you there as well. I mean, depending on the particular God belief, it's generally thought that God has a plan, and everything goes according to God's plan. So by praying and asking for something, you're essentially either asking him to change his plan or saying, can you do the thing that you were going to do anyway? So asking for someone, I mean, generally it's thought that more prayer should be done to give thanks and love and stuff like that, or ask for understanding of certain situations, rather than actually change your plan for me. So yeah, I'd have to agree with you there, Kevin. Cafe says, what kind of prayer? Usually, when I hear these arguments coming from atheists, they're invariably referring to inter intercessory prayer and completely overlook the efficacy of contemplative prayer. So obviously, I'm talking specifically of people in hospital being prayed to get better. That's essentially it. That's all I am talking of. I completely agree with you. There are definitely different kinds of prayer, and actually, people who are praying to their God ought to do as you say. Almost see it as a form of meditation, if you will.
you'd be surprised on how many people just do that. You could synonymously and replace the word prayer with something like that on everyday life. You find that that level of meditation in martial arts, often, in fact.